Good morning. I'm Evelyn Goslin, your facilitator for today's service. Please turn your cell phones on vibrate. If you have an announcement or a joy or sorrow to read, please fill out the forms on the back table in the back of the room, and someone will bring them up to me. I want to welcome everyone here in person and those on Zoom. In fact, if you are willing and able, will you please rise or turn in your seats and wave hello to the people on Zoom? If you are new here, please ask any one of us how to get access to our website or find out how to get involved in our activities. If you would like to receive our newsletter, please ask Deborah Smith, Becky Tanner, or any one of us to put your name on our email list. We have a few announcements. Today we have a second collection. The first time the baskets are passed, we will collect them for the life of this church. The second time we come around, we will gather funds for our emergency assistance fund. That helps with utility bills or gives gift cards to Big Five and Target that offer tents, work shoes, food to the homeless or working poor. This fund is also available to members and friends of this congregation who are in financial crisis. We give out gift cards, etc. on the third Friday of the month, and Tina needs someone to do this for us on July 19th. It is good to have several people here to do this. Please see Tina today or email or text her if you're able to do this. Free Thinkers will meet today at 1 p.m. Tina's office hours will not be at the usual time until Tuesday, July 23rd, when they will be from 12:30 to 3:30 once again. She will be away from tomorrow until the morning of Tuesday, July 23rd. You can call, text, or email her, but she might not see them or respond as quickly. If you need to see someone in person or would like to get something into the caring corner of our newsletter and into Joys and Sorrows and Worships, please reach out to Ginger Ryan. She will soon be a member of our committee, thank you, on shared ministry and will help you. Announcements from the congregation is, wait.
Oh, okay. Someone wants to announce The Cowboy Ain't Dead Yet, starring R.J. Vandegrift as Joe Texas, live. And their show dates July 20th and 21st at the K Palace. Okay, we all love going to the K Palace. I've yet to go. I feel excluded. No, it's a wonderful. So yeah, this is happening. Is anyone we know in this production? Just him. Cool. Okay, so the K Palace on the 20th and 21st of July will have R.J. Vandegrift as Joe Texas. The Cowboy Ain't Dead Yet. Thank you. Oh, and this was from Rita and Lex wanting us to know because they'll be working there. Yeah, no, it's fine.
Sorry. Okay. Let's see.
Oh, Better Bucks.
Oh, shoot.
Okay. So Better Bucks said, we are in receipt of the generous $703 donation by Sky Island to Better Bucks in support of our Better Meals program. That was our last emergency assistance fund, and we were paying down the debt on school lunches with the progressive pastors in town. So when I know the full amount we all gave together, I'll let you know. But it's in the many thousands, probably tens of thousands. Some of the churches are bigger than we are. So welcome everyone to church here at Sky Island Unitarian Universalist Church. I didn't know the history of the flag, that it had been commissioned by Harvey Milk, and that the first person who thought of this idea was Gilbert Baker. He said he wanted something in nature, and he sees a rainbow as a flag in the sky. Also in the beginning, the 8 different colors represented different things, like red was life, orange was healing, yellow was sunlight, green was nature, turquoise was magic and art, indigo serenity, violet spirit, But they cut out two of the colors, the hot pink and the turquoise, because it was hard to find them to make the dyes. I found something that had them in it, so I just used them today in honor of the very first flag. And Gilbert Baker made it with a friend of his named Lynn Segerblom, also known as Fairy Argyle Rainbow. I don't know if that influenced the flag or vice versa, the name. And I just want to say it seems strange to be celebrating today since we went last weekend to Pride and marched in it together, but I wasn't here. And I still think it is still Pride Month, and it's still really important to lift up this important event. Our chalice lighting today asks, is Pride a party or a protest? And in my experience, of course, it's both. You know, it's a lot of fun in Bisbee. It's a wonderful day, so many people gathered, so many exuberant spirits. And then every once in a while I'll be hit by, oh, this is really important to do as well, as a protest, as an affirmation. I think I've told you a few years ago, Wally helped me carry a banner for our little tiny Christian community we had, and we gathered with you and the Episcopal Church, and somebody from Phoenix saw the flag and came over to us and said, churches do this? And they were from a mega church in Phoenix that had hurt them greatly. And so they were going to go back to Phoenix and look up those weird denominations, all three of them, that might carry the flag. And then I think I know I've told you last year, I went up to the Episcopal priest. His name was John Caleb Collins. He has since left the area. His church in Bisbee, St. John's, was yoked with St. Stephen's in Douglas. And in May of 2023, that church in Douglas was burned because he is gay. And I went up to him and said, I really had hoped to reach out to you to figure out a way to help. And he said, I would have told you to show up here. And there were 20 of us last year in the parade. So it really does mean a lot. It is not a safe world for people who have different sexuality and gender identities, for the LGBTQIA plus community. It isn't safe, and it isn't a welcoming world. And so as much as we can affirm and welcome, I think it's important. And so for today, I wanted to celebrate Pride, because it's still in this month. So welcome.
Okay, our chalice lighting reading for today comes from the Reverend Hannah Roberts Villeneuve, who serves as a minister of the UU Church of Cheyenne, Wyoming. Prior to that, she lived in Baltimore, where she fell in love with crab cakes, Orioles baseball.
Orioles.
Orioles.
Sorry, that's my home team.
No, it's okay. And her wife, Catherine. They live in Cheyenne with their cat, Schweinsteiger, and enjoy hiking, sampling local beer, and dodging tumbleweeds on the highway. People sometimes ask, is Pride a protest or a party? And the answer is, of course, yes. And why not? Why not rejoice as we resist, dance as we demand change, celebrate as we create community that delights in all of who we are? So bring all of that with you this morning. Bring your policy demands, bring your glitter, bring your Supreme Court broken heart, bring your rainbow socks, bring the emptiness you feel for our siblings gone too soon. Bring your Gloria Estefan remix, bring your tender hope for change, bring your most garish eyeshadow, bring your spirit tattered and battered by a world that seems insistent on choosing fear and hate. Gather up all these things and bring them here to a place where we don't have to shoulder these burdens or celebrate these joys alone. Come, let us worship together. All right, and our joys, let's see. We are a caring congregation and share what gives us joy and what weighs heavily on our heart. I will read the joys and sorrows I have here, and are there any more in the back? Okay. You may put your joys and sorrows in the chat on Zoom or turn off mute and speak them out loud at this very moment. a joy from Pat Fleming. She is happy beyond too many words. Bob Fleming has had great results from his medical procedures over the past year. That is definitely a joy. A joy for me is I got married to my wife. Yes. And then, I will, where'd it go? Sorry, one second. I will add stones for all of the joys and sorrows that fill our hearts but have not been said out loud.
So, as I was saying, when I take part in Pride in Bisbee, there's so much exuberance, and then there's always this moment of reckoning, of deepening, of I'm so glad I'm here. And this year, it was a little different. It happened when I looked out and I saw people I had known, people from other churches in Southeast Arizona. We had 2 people from Mountain Vista, even though they had 2 other events the church was part of that day for Juneteenth and for other events. 2 people came, and we had 4 people from the UU Church of Tucson, and about 20 of us between the parade and sitting at the table. And it was just amazing to see the joy. The joy finally moved me to a depth I hadn't expected. I can't fully understand what that joy is about. Yes, sometimes I have experienced difficulty because of my gender. Yes, I have been attacked at the core of my being, my sexuality, but not to the extent constantly that your identity and the core of who you are, I believe, is attacked if you're LGBTQIA in this world we live in. And so I saw 2 people I had often seen on Zoom, kind of serious, maybe a little dour, dancing and sashaying and having a really good time. Their joy was infectious, but it really made me realize why this is so important, why this party matters. And if you want to catch a bit of the joy, we're going to show you Amber Trippa, who's sitting, raise your hand, put together a little video for us. And much of our expense, which wasn't huge, came out of a grant the Baja 4 got, and at least 2 other Baja 4 churches did show up, so that was wonderful. Well, thank you all who were there. Thank you for indulging us by watching. But I do think it's really, really important that we show up and that we support. Throughout this General Assembly, I've been hearing about groups of people who are not welcome, who are often not safe. There was a really interesting discussion about fat liberation at the intersection by Reverend Dr. Anastasia Kidd and Tigress Osborne. And what Reverend Dr. Anastasia said is she made a case for fat shaming in this country, or the need for fat liberation, stemming from Greek philosophers who very often touted the spirit over body, rational men with thin bodies over everybody else. And that as we colonized the world, we imposed that on the world. Often people of color and women are of different shapes. They don't look like white, thin, reasonable men. And a friend of mine, this week, a friend of mine was at my house and she saw a book. She said, "Oh, can I borrow it?" She's enough Indian that she receives payout, what are those called, dividends periodically. And she was really interested. It was a book for kids about First People. But she paged through it and she said, "Boy, Indians are ugly, aren't they?" Put down the book and didn't take it with her. And I thought they were beautiful. They looked healthy, they were dressed, they were glowing in the sun, but they had rounder faces and bodies than the norm. And it's really, really built into us. I mean, it's sort of safe to make jokes about fat people still, right? That's not cool. And she went on to say, Dr. Kidd, that right now, especially in our country, evangelical Christianity and its emphasis on a kind of purity is really, really pushing the thinness. She was talking about the thousands of, somebody went through and looked through the newspapers and ads and articles, and there were 20,000 ads for weight loss programs and only 200 for fat liberation, stopping fat shaming, coming to accept who you are. So that group of people, often included with many others, is not celebrated or affirmed or loved in this country. The Ware Lecture, which happens the last big day of the General Assembly, was yesterday, and it was done by Rabbi Dr. Julia Watts-Belser, who uses a wheelchair, and she was speaking about disability justice. And even she says, "I overlook things." One day she was very proud of herself. She had asked for space to be left for her at her table so she could come in her wheelchair. But then someone else wheeled in a wheelchair. And she said it was fabulous that there was, the disability people are getting out and coming to these talks, but I hadn't thought about making more room, quite literally, at the table. The person was gracious, and they rearranged things with her, as they probably have had to many times before, she wrote. But again, and as she went through her talk, it was heartbreaking to see these incredibly beautiful people with beautiful poetry and quotes, so often overlooked and not given a place in life. One of them talked about the year she was bedridden was the year she learned about light. The color, the sky changes before sunrise and sunset, the colors of the skies, different times and seasons of the year. She learned about light. She also brought up a person who was so overlooked and felt so ill-treated, but they found a place in the rocks to sit and be solid and feel like they mattered. Even if it was only they who acknowledged that they mattered, they did. And she talked about how dangerous it is in this country to be a person with a disability. So often your requests for needed health assistance are denied by insurance, and you may die. With the fires in California, Many people were without power, without oxygen. Their lives were threatened, and a group of disability activists worked to get power and get supplies to those people. But you are put in a terrible situation and you're not seen. I only bring that up because I think a lot of this is interconnected. Each experience is different, but in this country, if you're LGBTQIA+, you and fat people are the last group people make horrible jokes about. You're not seen, you're not valued, and there's this feeling of not being at home. Rabbi Dr. Julia says, how would it be if we knew from the beginning that we belong? And she says, the very thing they told us was our flaw is our beauty. I want to build a world with you, a world that celebrates and cradles us, a world that wants us here, a world that desires us. She's saying that about people with disabilities, but it also applies to Bisbee Pride, right? One day a year we try to say, you are not only welcome here, you are celebrated. And I feel like every Father's Day weekend, Bisbee is my hometown. This is a place where you belong and you are loved. The United Church of Christ, which I was ordained in, does something like having a welcoming congregation. It's called open and affirming congregations. And I've walked through that process with 3 churches. And often people ask, well, can't we just be open and welcome? Why do we have to be open and affirming of people who are LGBTQIA+? And the point is because in so many places in the world and so many churches in the world, you have not been affirmed for who you are. So yes, you have to be welcomed and celebrated, and we have to protest and party more than just once a year, right? To welcome, to bring people in. And of course, every experience is different for people. How they come to make sense of this identity, how they celebrate it in the world. Mason Funk wrote a book, The Book of Pride, LGBTQ Heroes Who Changed the World, because he woke up in the middle of the night realizing, as a gay man, he had not made the journey alone. He had done it with the support of many others who'd gone before him, but their stories of those elders might wink out as more of them died and left. And so he wanted to start a foundation that collects those stories. And he sees his book as just a start. He points out, though, that everybody's different. For instance, with gay marriage, for a lot of queer people, marriage is a betrayal of who we are and who we should be. They point to marriage's deeply flawed history as a system for men to effectively own women. And they note that today, a majority of marriages end in divorce. Why would we want to buy into such an institution? That debate reflects a fundamental truth, perhaps obvious, perhaps not, about the queer community, on marriage and 1,000 other topics, including the word queer, which I like and use interchangeably with LGBTQ, but other people don't. We cross boundaries, transcend definition, encompassing every facet of America's richly pluralistic population. And he talks about how so many members of his community are rule breakers. And sometimes we take things a step further, even breaking the basic rules of engagement. So one of his heroes is Lani Kahumani, who in the early 70s came out as a lesbian in San Francisco. But a few years later, she fell in love with a man. Whoops. Facing condemnation from virtually every side, including many of her lesbian friends, she stood her ground. She's one of America's most honored and cherished bisexual leaders. We can't say that there's any one thing that works, but I found a really interesting book by Andrew Gelwicks called The Queer Advantage. And again, he goes out and interviews. In the middle of an interview that he had as an openly gay man who's been really successful working in movies and theater, and now he does makeup and dressing of the stars, like several of the people you'd see on a red carpet, he has put together. And he says, when he was interviewed in New York by a paper, they said, so what has helped you the most in getting forward in your career? And he thought, wow, being gay. Not because it just meant, oh, he was in that, he was in that community, but it had given him a strength, an awareness of his identity, an awareness to stand up to people. It just had given him a lot that he wouldn't have had he not been gay, had he not come out. For him, it was a long period of depression and working through it, and he was able to face the fashion industry, which is a really scary place, because he had done that. Barney Frank, the congressman from Massachusetts, came out in 1987. He started working in Congress in 1980, and he's asked, well, do you think your congressional colleagues treated you differently afterwards? He said, yeah, it was better. People already knew I was gay. They knew I was thinking of coming out. And many of the liberals had said, who were, personally pro-gay, don't do it, because in those days it wouldn't have been accepted. He might have lost his seat. He said, when he came out, they said, you're so much nicer now. You're so much less angry. And over again, the people in Gelwick's book talk about the power of being able to show up with all of who they are. All of their creativity is possible. All of who they are is welcome. And how important that has been to them. And for many people, they've had to understand, as any minority does, you have to watch the majority and understand how they behave. So many have had to learn how to, watch a crowd, read a room, have social skills. Many of us who don't have to read the room like that have. And so for so many people, that has been a way forward. But Franks also points out that things are different among people and in situations. He says his optimism was based on an observation of what was happening. Something I said after I came out was, it turns out the American people are much less homophobic than they think they are supposed to be, but unfortunately more racist than they want to admit. And so he says, my optimism was based on my sense that prejudice was pretty thin, not based on much, but that racism is so entrenched, so deep. I want us to live and build a world where who we are is celebrated and loved and affirmed, whatever difference you might hold up, especially, of course, this month, the LGBTQIA plus community. But if you are homeless, you're often not seen in this society. And our EAF really does help with that. If you are fat, you're often not seen. I went to groups talking about classism at GA, at the General Assembly, and twice people shared a similar story. One woman said, I had grown up pretty working class, but I was now professional. My husband and I went to a meeting to somebody's very fancy house, and a woman came up and asked, well, where do you live in Connecticut? And when she named the working class town where they had bought a cute little bungalow they could afford, the woman turned away and walked off. She didn't live in the right place. Another woman said that when she started college, the first person in her family to go, two young women came up to her and they were asking everybody, what does your father do? It shows you how old it was. And when she said, my father's a butcher at the A&P, they turned around and walked off. There's so many ways we don't love, accept, support each other. I want to build a world where our hometown is Bisbee every week. I want to build a world where we show that love and that justice, where we really embody the idea that justice is what is love made public. I want to be in that world. Please join me. And now, because I've been talking about General Assembly, Ginger and I figured I'll talk about it, But after many days of really boring and brutal business meetings, Ginger said, why? The church paid so much for me to be here and so much for me to be there. I guess she was, I don't know, were you more expensive? Anyway, who cares? It was a lot of money. And what does the church get back? And as she said, they're just like, what was it? It's like a dog-eat-dog world, or? Dog fights. Every single business meeting was like a dog fight. It was terrible. There's a lot that is fabulous, like the Ware Lecture, and there's a lot of on-demand programming, a lot of good discussions. But I'm going to be brave and talk to you a little bit about the business meetings, not the dog fights, but about what was decided coming out of all that. So in the Unitarian Universalist Church, there's something called an AIW, which is, it's called an action of immediate witness. And if I could find them, there were 3 proposed actions of immediate witness. One was called The World on Fire, the humanitarian work of climate change. And I'm not going to read to you all of it, but I'm going to read to you the actions they propose coming out of it. The General Assembly calls on the President of the U.S. to use the National Emergencies Act to declare that the climate crisis is a national crisis. The impact of climate change brings congregations into a new era for religious activities, education, and humanitarian work. The GA calls for immediate and direct action during the next 120 days. Congregations are asked to help each other and to act with marginalized groups to provide humanitarian services while working for justice. Community advocates for racial justice, indigenous peoples, migrants, houseless peoples, people living in prisons and other institutions, the very young and the very old, and other marginalized groups can identify community needs and opportunities for cooperation. Cooling stations, emergency transportation, emergency shelter. I will put all of this, a link to this in the next newsletter, but it's very clear that climate justice and humanitarian work need to go together, because who is most affected by climate change? All of us, but the most marginalized especially. The most marginalized. Often live in community, often don't have air conditioning, or live in communities that are more polluted, or where toxic dumps have been put. So that's the first one, and it passed. There's an action of immediate witness called Centering Love Amongst the Ongoing Impact of COVID, and it basically says, let us be aware there are still people suffering long COVID. We may need to wear masks. Let's support each other. We are called upon to reflect upon any barriers keeping us from holding onto the pandemic practices which so effectively countered isolation and fostered radical inclusion. So we keep our Zoom going for people who don't feel safe being here, or who live in North Carolina or Las Vegas. But that's important, and that one passed. And the third one is solidarity with Palestinians. I'm just going to the end, which says, resolved, we, the delegates of the 2024 General Assembly, call on the UU communities to be in solidarity with Palestinians by engaging in the following actions based on the guidance of Palestinian and impacted partner organizations: witnessing, calling for the liberation of Palestine, an end to apartheid, call for an exchange of Israeli hostages and Palestinian political prisoners, hold teach-ins about Palestine and Israel that include sacred spaces for processing, protect the freedom and safety of solidarity activists by supporting protests, and oppose legislation and policy that restrict First Amendment rights. So that passed. And then there was a responsive resolution, making sure we take a stand against what happened October 7th. See if I can find that, sorry. Yep. So it's called a responsive resolution. Whereas UUA President Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt's report beautifully reflected upon the profound horror and loss in the Middle East, which is amplifying growing anti-Semitism and anti-Arabism and Islamophobia in the U.S. and beyond, whereas real harm that has come to and continues to be suffered by those affected by October 7th attack, whereas 120 hostages are still missing and only about 50 are thought to be alive, whereas a call for recognition of only harm on one side without regard for the other creates an environment of existential threat to Jewish Unitarian Universalists. Therefore, let it be resolved, the General Assembly of the UUA calls for the immediate release of all Hamas-held hostages and acknowledges the real suffering of Jews within our association and beyond. There can be no peace and no justice unless it is for all people. And that also passed. The last one is a business proposal to emphasize that intersex, trans, non-binary people are an expression of Unitarian Universalist religious life. But then the one about, how many of you know the result for the changes to Article 2? So we voted on that yesterday, and unlike the will of this church, it passed. It was interesting listening to one young woman who said, "My children have not memorized the 7 principles, and I can't. But they can remember T-Pig, which is all those different parts." There was an amendment to try to add in peace, but that was not passed. So T-Pig doesn't have 2 Ps. And if you want me to tell you what the T-Pig stands for, I've forgotten as well. So anyway, I just thought it would be important, after you heard about all that, to see how you felt about what happened at GA, a time you have felt affirmed when you have been shamed much in your life. If you wanted to speak up, we have a microphone, right, that can go around. Becky would like to speak, and she has to wait so people on Zoom can hear her. You're being good. No, you're being good.
Thank you. I'm speaking about Article 2. And I guess I truly believe that we as our own congregation, if we want to still follow the 7 principles, we can still follow.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to say that I became a Unitarian Universalist before I even knew about the 7 principles, but I would not follow them. And I don't believe that we should say the monthly thing that we do say is sort of like a creed where we say we're open to change. Well, we're not open to change if we don't accept the change. So it's a contradiction. But I also wanted to say that this is Pride Month.
Yeah.
And I've been enjoying the programs on TV about pride. There's 2 channels that have been showing old movies.
Oh, wow.
And I saw one last night on Turner Classic Movies. It was very moving, very humane, starring Anne Bancroft as the mother. And it was quite a program. So look for anything that might be on television regarding Pride Month.
Would that be Torch Song Trilogy? No. Oh. Yeah. She's Ma Beckhoff.
Pat, can you say something about that movie? Just the plot?
What's that?
The movie you saw, but the plot?
Oh, well, it's about a son that's and Bancroft's son, and he's in a relationship with another man for 9 years, and they're celebrating that they're going to adopt a son who's also gay, who's 15. And he goes out to buy food and champagne, and he sees someone being beat up, so he goes to help that person, and he gets murdered by a baseball bat because he's gay. And so Anne Bancroft's son goes ahead and adopts the boy. So the mother and the son are in conflict because she don't understand his gay life. And she don't understand that he adopted a boy that's also gay. So it's a big conflict, so.
That
It
came out in
was-
1988.
Yeah, it was an old movie.
I just want to make a quick
It
comment.
was glorious, something about glory in the title.
And we say our covenant once a month, not because it's just to remind ourselves of good behavior that we want to, stay true to. It's not really a creed. But I agree with you. If we're not open to change, we might not want to say it. I don't know if everybody says every part. And I just want to quickly add, my sons and husband and I, for some bizarre reason, were looking up the biggest causes of death in the world, right? And first was the 1918 pandemic flu. Second was a 1300 outbreak of plague. And do you know what number 3 was? No. AIDS. Since 1981, 36 million people have died of it. And then before COVID was World War II, then World War I. We never talk about that terrible, terrible pandemic. So, all right.
I'm next. So what business is it of ours, somebody else's sexual orientation? What business is it of ours? The other point I'm going to make is,
What business?
I think to affirm, you have to affirm the courage of gay people. And I'm thinking as a free thinker, I have to applaud that courage. And I'm thinking about my whiny atheist friends saying, "Oh, they're picking on me." Got to follow a good example.
Those poor atheists.
I just have a comment about the thing, something I guess Pat said about we're not open to change. Is there a way that we can start proving that we can be open to change?
Good question. Good question, Chris. Yeah. I mean, I think any church, of all the churches I've been involved with, this one is far more open to change
Really?
than any I've been in. For instance, when we rearranged the seating, the only comments I got were, "This is great. Why didn't we do it sooner?" I mean, I know that sounds like a little thing, but messing with people's seating, messing with people's...
Wouldn't do it in a Baptist church.
Obviously it would be good for us to push ourselves.
And
but-
sometimes the little things are the ones that count the most, too.
Yeah. I mean, you open and affirming in UCC churches were nothing like talking about changing the hymnal. So you just don't know what's going to hit a different way. Anybody else want to make? Roland, over here. Over here towards me. Evelyn wants to say something.
Have your turn already?
Just on the topic of pride, I grew up with not affirming religion or parents or anything, and so I grew up as early as I can remember, around maybe 7, just thinking that I was just gross and just wrong. Just something was wrong with me. I was going to go to hell, all of this stuff, because I knew that I liked girls, but, you know, it was always just a Satan tempting you. It's just dirty, it's wrong. Let's fast forward through the two men holding hands, close your eyes, you know, ew, is what I always heard from it. And so I grew up from very young thinking that I was wrong and something was wrong with me and just awful. And so as I continued to grow, I realized I was gay, and that whole year was spent with me praying and crying, trying to get rid of it, you know, but it doesn't work that way. And so I did finally accept it, but then I didn't truly accept it and like actually act on it until I was like 26 years old with 2 kids, and I just, it's the littlest things will affirm these feelings, and it's people just don't get it. You know, we'll watch the new She-Ra cartoon on Netflix, and I freaking sobbed because it's just, I think there's one straight person in the whole show, and I've never had that before. And this is a show for kids, so I was able just to watch it and cry because I was just so happy to see so much acceptance, and, you know, 2 women who were married and the main characters fall in love. And it's like, I just sobbed because my kids get to have this thing that I never got to have when I was older. They're not going to grow up thinking that there's something wrong with them if they're gay, or that it's gross if somebody is holding hands. Like, they're not going to have that like I did, and they're going to be able to see me truly being in love and truly happy with my wife, and like the fact that I get to say the word wife. I never thought I was going to be able to say that. It's just like, I don't know, I wish I could explain to people how incredible it is, even though it's so small, just to be able to say my wife instead of my husband, and just be able to not hide that anymore. And like, pride is just so much more important than we even realize, because of just the bare minimum of being able to say my wife. And yeah, that's my affirming thought.
Whoa, thank you. Thank you. I didn't want to get you on the spot and have a panel, but that would have been really good. Next.
Hey, Richard.
If you're still putting up with this.
I just wanted to mention, am I too loud? One of my favorite films is Prayers for Bobby, which is based on a book by the same title. The book takes place in the 1950s, I believe. And the film that was made, I think, I want to say around 2008, 2009, I could be wrong. But Sigourney Weaver plays a mother, a very devoutly religious mother of a family, a larger family that she has, and her son realizes that he is gay, and he tries to keep it, secret from his family, and he still goes to church. He still, goes through all the things that a good Christian kid is supposed to do, but he knows that he's gay. And when it does come out, the family gets enraged, and his parents get angry, the father especially. And Sigourney Weaver, the mother, she tries to help him pray to turn himself, what she says is normal. And she keeps praying to God that God will save her son, from this sickness. But things fall apart, and he ends up committing suicide. And so the film kind of follows her, most of the film, it follows her path as she, tries to recover his things. She looks through his things that he had in his bedroom. And she finds out that he was going to a church that is accepting of gays, but she doesn't realize this. She just knows that there's this thing, this church that he went to apparently. She wanted to go meet the minister of that church. So she goes to meet the minister, and that scene is really interesting because they sit down. He's very friendly with her, and the first thing they do is start arguing about Scripture. And that little scene is interesting, but it's a very emotional film. She breaks down that when she realizes, all this time I spent praying to God that God would cure my son when there was nothing wrong with him to begin with. And anyway, it's sort of the precursor to what eventually became PFLAG, the PFLAG organization, and I like the way it ends too, but I don't know why. If you want to see it, I don't want to spoil it for you, but it's a really good ending. The title, again, is Prayers for Bobby. That's the name of the film. You can probably see it on Netflix, I think.
Hear these closing words adapted from opening words by Reverend Dr. Richard S. Gilbert, who retired in June 2005 after serving 44 years in the Unitarian Universalist ministry in Ohio, Colorado, and finally for 32 years at the First Unitarian Church of Rochester, New York, where our dear Richard and Gail Wilder attend. Currently, he is part-time social justice coordinator for the St. Lawrence Unitarian Universalist District, does guest preaching, social justice workshops, and is working on several books, including The Religious Life of Susan B. Anthony and The History and Philosophy of UU Religious Education.
I cut out half of it. I thought those were interesting.
As we extinguish our chalice today, let us acknowledge that we meet on holy ground, brought into being as life encounters life, as personal histories merge into the communal story, as we take on the pride and pain of our companions, as separate selves become community. How desperate is our need for one another. Our silent beckoning to our neighbors, our invitations to share life and death together, our welcome into the lives of those we meet, and their welcome into our own. May our souls remember and capture this treasured time. May our spirits celebrate this meeting in this time and in this space, for we met on holy ground and go forth stronger for that blessing. Go in peace.